take us sort of more or less in order through, you think?
Well,
sort of story?
yeah, well, I thought, you know, if we start from 1939, I mean,
yeah,
my first recollection.
If you look up towards me,
I see.
so you're talking towards the camera more.
Yeah.
We'll try it that way and see how we go. But
yeah,
and then we'll do it that way, because otherwise you need two or three cameras to try and track everybody. You see. So if you look up towards me and look towards the camera, and let's see how we get that. But your first recollection.
Okay. Yeah, my first recollections of the war in '39 is the Sunday. I think it was the Sunday the 3rd. I was in the choir, and the vicar announced it in the church that we were at war. Of course, being a schoolboy of about 11 years old, you know, very excited about it. And then, yes, things changed in Aylsham. We had the army turning up. The first thing I remember is the territorials. I think they all assembled in the drill hall, and I can remember them doing route marches around, coming down to Aylsham, Dunkirk, where we lived. And I remember typical schoolboys, my brother and I.
So Dunkirk is a part of Aylsham?
Yes, yeah.
Can you say that? Because that's going to cause confusion to some child listening to this.
Good God. That's worse than finding Neil Close.
Just explain there's a part of Aylsham called Dunkirk, and then...
Yeah, well, we lived in Dunkirk, part of Aylsham, situated near Millgate, and the territorials doing their route marches would come past our place, and my brother and I, we had some palings, as we called them, and we fixed a bicycle tube across a couple of these like a catapult. So when the soldiers came marching past, we had some small potatoes, and we would pull these out and fire at the, you know, typical schoolboy stuff, you know. But then the evacuees came. I think they came a day or two before war was actually declared, because my grandmother had two billeted with her, and they were from a grammar school. I can't remember where they came from, but they were billeted here by mistake, because they should have gone to North Walsham, where the grammar school was. Then the next recollection I have is of the war actually coming home to us. We had, I think it was on a Saturday night, we had one bomb dropped. It was dropped at the back of the council houses on Sir William's Lane. There was a searchlight base behind the now high school, where the high school is now. And I remember a gang of us going from school over to look at the crater. It did no damage, but we were searching for pieces of shrapnel, as schoolboys do. I mean, we were all very excited about the whole thing. I then remember the blackout, the air raid wardens, various...
Special policemen?
Yes, special policemen. The bane of our lives. Used to be chasing us for not having rear lights. And sweet rationing, that was the next thing to start. I remember that affected most of the children. We were a bit cheesed off about that.
How old do you think you were then when the sweet rationing started?
Well, I'd be 11.
Can you say I'd be 11 when the sweet rationing started?
Yeah, I would be about 11 years old when the sweet rationing started.
Unless your father kept a sweet shop?
Yes. John Betts, of course. There was no such thing as rationing for John. Very popular John was at the time. I lost my train of
That's all
thought.
right. That's all right.
Shut up.
So John, can you say what I'll be saying all the while is to try and get you to say the whole sentence back. So can you say again, John's Bet's father ran a sweet shop or something like that? You see, then I'll cut that in with the other piece.
Yeah, you've got the sweet rationing thing, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the only exception to the
The rural.
sweet rationing problem was John Betts, because his father kept a newsagent's and sweet shop. So this made John a very popular lad with us at the time.
And where were you going to school at the time? Where did most of the boys in Aylsham go to school?
Well, we went to the, what was it, church school it was called, wasn't it?
Aylsham.
Aylsham. In those days it was segregated. There were the girls and the boys.
The big brick wall.
And a big brick wall. And then the thing we used to do, of course, we had a row of toilets along the back, and with doors at the back which were used for emptying them. Now, us boys would occasionally get a bunch of stinger nettles and undo the back door, and that was a real highlight of, because we didn't have television and videos, and we had to make our own entertainment. And I suppose stinger nettles in the back of the girls' toilet was great fun.
But we had, I mean, we had pop guns and catapults. I mean, people don't make pop guns.
No.
With acorns, do they?
Yeah.
They're regular things.
Can I just take you back a minute? What did the air raid wardens actually do?
Well, they were supposed to.
Can you say as the airway?
Yeah. The air raid wardens, their duties were to warn us of air raids. They would, I think it was blow a whistle for air raid, wouldn't they? We had the siren,
Yeah,
of
the
course,
siren.
but they also had rattles,
That was
which
gas.
this was in the case of a gas attack. But they were really around checking that your lights weren't showing, because we had this strict blackout. Of course, they were very, very keen on us having lights on our cycles and that sort of thing. But the blackout caused quite a bit of trouble, because Aylsham pre-war didn't have a sewer as such, a main sewer. This didn't come till the 50s. But in those days it was collected by the honey cart. And we had two Aylsham characters that ran this vehicle. That was Tilly Baker and Webby Brown, yeah. And they were great characters. I can always remember them. Early part of the war, Bob and I had got ourselves a tent. And so, of course, we crazed our father to let us sleep out in the tent. So we slept this, we parked it in the garden, and Webby Allen came round to pick it up and tripped over a guy rope. So you can imagine what happened. But the other great thing about it was, as I said, when the blackout came, we then had to have the collection during the day. So Webby would drive this cart around.
The Union Jack on.
Yeah, they had a Union Jack one side and some other flag the other, can't remember, and a fishing pole or a rod. And perhaps I shouldn't say this, but occasionally he would, if he saw us boys in Red Lion Street, he'd lift the fishing rod out of it and said, "I've caught a big one." But there we are. I mean, this is how humour was in those days. The thing, my memories of the war is camaraderie in the place, which hasn't been there since. I mean, I think people were all in the same position, all in the same dangers, and everybody sort of pulled together, and there was a feeling of togetherness that I've never felt since the end of the war.
You were talking about you went to the school in town, and other boys. Were other boys already? Was the 11 plus already working? Were boys already going to Paston?
Yes, yeah, but there were very few places, because Paston served, I suppose, all of North Norfolk, and there were you had to be exceptionally bright to get into that school.
There was only 3. When we did ours, there was only 3. It was Gerald Young's, Terence Pass, and and that was because they were sick at the time and took it again. They were very limited because my mother did complain, thinking that her boy should have passed. And apparently they were told by, I think Mr. Weatherbed said, you know, the war's on. A lot of the Edmonton grammar school boys went to North Walsham because they couldn't send them down here. And so it was just one of those things. Very few passed during the war years. That's my excuse anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'll pick up on that with you actually, because that's an interesting point, the way it affected things. So you were at Paston during the war years?
No, I was at Aylsham.
Because it's interesting the way that a lot of the schools lost their main teachers, and who was actually teaching at the schools then. They were often fill-in teachers that affected education.
Yeah,
anyway,
our teachers didn't vary. We had 2 teachers down from Edmonton, Mr. Donahue.
Yeah. No.
Oh.
No, just picking up across. No, I'll come back to you on that if I may.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
How far do we want to go with this? You know.
Well,
we just want your stories.
Yeah. So you were about 11, and so you can think of the bombing incident when you think they were after the Searchlight.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Were there any other actual attacks on the town?
Aircraft. What about you?
Yeah, but I actually, at the end of 1940, was it, John?
Something like that.
My father was a Welshman. He'd come down with the Glamorgan Yeomanry in the 1418 war, and he was shell-shocked and what have you. So after the bomb dropped, he then decided to evacuate us to Wales, so thinking that was the other side of the country and, you know, the bombers wouldn't get there. So I always remember we had an Austin 7, and my father suddenly decided that we would leave Norfolk and the bombs and go to live in Wales with relatives. So we shut the cottage down, we packed all our belongings in a blanket, tied them up and put them on the roof of this Austin 7. So there was mother, father, brother, younger brother and I, and we went off to Wales. And I always remember getting into Cardiff and the rope broke or string broke that was holding this thing on the roof, and all this stuff tumbled off the roof of this Austin 7 into the road in Cardiff. But of course in those days there wasn't the amount of traffic, you know. I remember scrambling all this stuff together and putting it back on, and eventually arriving at my aunt's in Wales, and my father hadn't bothered to tell her he was coming, and my family actually stayed there about 3 years. I stayed about 2 years and then came back to Norfolk because it was all happening here in Norfolk. The bombs were dropping. We had all the troops and Air Force here. So I came back, and
who did you live with when you came back?
I lived with my grandmother because all my family lived around here. You know, I mean, I suppose our family had been here for many hundreds of years. We originated from the Pauls, who had farm on, my mother's family on the Causton Road. My grandfather, Pumphrey, kept the Royal Oak, which is a pub in Dunkirk. And my father came down in the 1418 war with the Glamorgan Yeomanry, met my mother and raised a family here in Norfolk. And that was the reason that we went back, because we had family in Wales and in Norfolk. But I know I couldn't get back to Norfolk quick enough. I enjoyed being in Wales as a schoolboy for a couple of years, but my roots are in Norfolk, and that's where I wanted to be, and still do.
What was it like being with grandmother instead of with mother and father?
Well, it was, living with my grandmother was great because I was more or less brought up with my grandmother in the pub because the cottage we lived in was quite close, and being 2 up and 2 down, and I had 2 brothers and myself, so it was rather a lot for the cottage. So my mother used to put me over to the pub with my grandmother, so her and I were great friends anyway. Yeah, and it was great. And of course I felt the man of the house because my grandfather was dead at that time, and at 14 when I left school, you know, I think I felt that I was quite grown up to be in the house and virtually be the breadwinner.
So what was a pub like during the war?
Well, the pub actually closed just before the war, but it was left empty for many years until it was turned into houses. But the Royal Oak was a real spit and sawdust place, you know. There was no electricity, no sewer. We had flagstones. I remember in the bar helping my grandmother, there were flagstones on the floor, and we put sand down every day.
By the time you came back from Wales, what had changed about Aylsham? Did you notice change?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I came back, it was just more like a military base, you know. I mean, you couldn't move for uniforms. We had 3 or 4 aerodromes around here, and of course the RAF, and of course the soldiers, that they came to Aylsham for their entertainment. I mean, we had the cinema. That was the big draw, and then the dances on Saturday nights. The pubs, of course, everywhere was absolutely packed in those days, because suddenly, our population must have gone up here, what, 400 or 500%, I would think. I mean, there was always Air Force personnel from Blickling and Alton, from RAF Coldershall. I mean, they would converge on the town. There would be Liberty trucks coming in just about every night with loads of soldiers and RAF on. I think the other thing that I do remember, of course, I wasn't old enough to participate, and in any case, I don't think the RAF would have wanted me there, but they sent these passion wagons, and they came and picked up all the available young ladies to go to the dances on the airfield. Then, when I came back, I suppose after a year or 2, brother and I enlisted in the fire service as messenger boys. Now this was a great time, this really was, because we would go on duty, I think we went on duty about 7 or 8 at night, and then we'd go through till 7 in the morning. And we had uniforms. I always remember we had peaked hats, and we tried to turn them into Gestapo-looking things by bending the wires down in the hat. Yeah, that was. We used to then go to attend the air crashes. Of course, to us, this was all very exciting. But in retrospect, you know, it was terrible because we had no end of air crashes around here. I remember one Sunday towards the end of the war, hearing bombs exploding. Bob and I get straight out of bed, bike up to town, and I remember as we went through Red Lion Street, the bombs exploding and the windows shaking, and I thought some of the shop windows were going to break. You could see them vibrating. And about half a dozen of us men, and I think 3 or 4 of us messenger boys were there, because we were the keenest of all, jumped on the wagon, and we went to this crash. 2 Liberators had collided near Skyton Goat. And that was the first time that I ever saw a dead body, and that was awful. That left a terrible impression on me. That took all the excitement and glamour out of the job when I saw parts of human bodies being lifted up. I remember the Padre from RAF Coldershall was there, and he picked up a tunic, and when he picked it up, there was an arm in it and all the rib cage and that hanging from it, and I nearly threw up. I felt really awful, you know, and that something I shall never ever forget.
How old were you?
I should think I'd be about 15 or, no, 16, I think, yeah. I'd be 16 at the time then. But the fire service experience was great. You know, we went to several crashes. I always remember going to one at just outside RAF Alton, and it was a mosquito. And of course, as you know, that aircraft was built almost entirely of wood, and when we arrived there, there was nothing left but 2 engines. The rest of it had burnt out completely.
You talked about you heard bombs going off. What did you mean by?
Well, the liberators, the American liberators, were assembling. They used to assemble in this area. They'd take off from various airfields and fly around and assemble in a block. And this is when they collided, and these were the actual bombs from the aircraft, the American aircraft that had crashed, because it was all in flames, and presumably it was the heat that exploded the bombs.
What was the main job of the messenger boy? What was a messenger boy supposed to be doing?
Well, making tea was the main occupation.
Can you say making tea was the main occupation of the messenger boy?
Yeah. Yeah, making tea was the main occupation of the messenger boy. And also, we had to man the telephones. But the main thing about the messenger boy experience was learning to play cards, because I'd never gambled in my life until and at 16, I was exposed to poker, brag, you name it. My only problem was, if I had a good hand, I got so excited, nobody ever bet any money on it. Because another thing that sticks out in my mind, we had a lad called David Fish, who was also a messenger boy, and him and I were there one night playing cards, and David threw a £0.50 onto the table, and it went plop. So of course we picked this up and had a look at it, and it was a forgery. Somebody had made a £0.50 out of lead, and it was almost perfect, you know. And the thing I remember, that I thought, my God, that's a way to make money, turn lead into money. So I and a friend, we tried very, very hard to cast £0.50. At the time I was working at Saxthorpe Foundry, and I tried foundry sand. That didn't work. We were told that you could make them with plaster of Paris, but we eventually gave up, so I don't know how this thing was made, but that was almost perfect. Needless to say, I remained free and wasn't imprisoned because I did